Hi and welcome to my creative art studio. In this video I want to share some of the techniques I use for watercoloring on my cards that I make. So we're going to actually make two cards in this video, and they're going to have a few little different techniques between them. So let's start first by creating a watercolor background. So I'm going to show you how to make a background like this that we're going to use in one of our cards. And I'm using a watercolor brush and a water spritzer, so a bottle that's got water and it just spritzes the water out. And the water brush I really like. If you don't have one of these, you can use a paintbrush and a little container of water. I just like this because it has this tube that you fill with water, and so it's always ready to go for me. I just have it right on my desk and I can pick it up and use it anytime. And all you really need to do with the water brush is take some paper towel and, there's a little spot on the side that says push, and that helps the water start to move on the brush, and then you can just use it to clean it off in between colors. So very handy. Now what I want to show you with this technique, and this is one I already completed so that it can go on the card that we're going to put together, but I'm going to show you how to do that on a larger piece of watercolor paper. So this is actually watercolor paper, and it's a little bit textured. It's not a really smooth finish, and this paper just really holds water better. It doesn't like seep through and get all soggy. It holds the water really well and allows water to move. So that's kind of a fun product to use, and we're going to do that in this first project. And then what I'm going to show you is how you can use the supplies you have. So for this first project, we're going to use ink pads and re-inkers. And a re-inker is just the ink that goes on your pad. So if your ink pad starts to get dried out, instead of having to purchase a whole new ink pad, which is a little bit more expensive, you can actually purchase these re-inkers, and then you just kind of add ink to your pad. And so that's a very economical way to do it. So I'm going to show you how to use those and the ink pads to do this watercolor technique. So let's get started. And I'm going to start with Calypso Coral. And you can see how there's ink in the top of this lid. You can do that by squishing the pad together, like squishing the center when it's closed. But I'm going to show you how to do it right on a non-porous surface. So some of the newer ink pads, they're a little harder to squish together like that. So this is a technique that will work for all of your different ink pads. So I basically am just transferring some ink right onto this non-porous surface. And I like to do that too because I really try to keep water away from my ink pad. I don't want to saturate my ink pad with water and kind of lighten the color that it's intended to be. So I prefer to take my ink off onto a non-porous surface before I start to use water. So then I'm going to use Pear Pizzazz. That will be my second one. And I think I'll put it on this end just so it's easier to get it on there without messing up the Calypso Coral. So again, just adding the ink right onto this non-porous surface. So now I have two colors on there, and I'll put these aside. Hopefully I have enough color. I don't need to pull those back out. And then I'm going to use this re-inker for Highland Heather. And these are very saturated colors, so I really just need a drop. So I'll add that one, and then I'm using Pacific Point. So I'll add a drop of that on here as well. That's really plenty. Amazing how far that goes. So now I have 4 colors and I'm ready to create this background. So this is a great technique to, maybe you don't have a lot of patterned papers, but you want to make a background for your card. So this is a great technique. So what I want to do, because this is watercolor paper and it handles water really well, I want to take this spritzer and I'm going to soak it, okay? And I'll do this off to the side just so my surface here doesn't get too wet. but I'm just spritzing this several times so it's good and wet. There, and you can see there's plenty of water on that piece of paper, that watercolor paper. Hopefully that is enough. And I'm going to start with the Calypso Coral. That's going to be the bottom of my my background paper. Oh, there you could just see I just dropped some water right out of my brush. So that's very, very wet. Might be a little too wet, but we'll see. So now I'm going to just pick up some of this Calypso Coral and just start to place it on my surface, and see how the water on this watercolor paper just starts to wick it away. So that's really all I'm doing, is just transferring some color down here and letting the water and the watercolor paper do its thing. And this is probably enough. And you can, you can move it around yourself as well, or you can just kind of let the paper and the water do its thing. And if you have, I have a big pool of water right there. I'm going to just grab my paper towel and just dab a little bit. It's a little bit too heavy, I think. Okay, so now as I mentioned before, you just take your brush and just wipe it off, maybe push a little bit more water out and wipe it off, and there you're ready to go with your next color. So now I'm going to pick up the Pear Pizzazz, and it's going to just join here with the Calypso Coral. So again, just getting the color down there onto the paper and letting the water and the paper do its thing. And it's nice to get some deeper colors in some areas and lighter colors elsewhere. Okay, so that is that color, and I'm ready to move on to my next one. So again, clean off my brush while I transfer to a new color. And then next I'm going to pick up the Highland Heather. Now remember, this is the re-inker, so it's really a saturated color. Look at that. Isn't that awesome how that just kind of spreads out like that? Okay, I think that's enough of that color. Clean my brush again and move to the last one, which is the Pacific Point. You can see your paper also wants to curl up from the water that's on it, and we can get that to flatten out. So I think I have enough on there. I'm happy with that and how that looks. And I'm going to cut this down a little bit. This is a little larger than I'm planning to use on the front of my card. So I don't mind having some of the white space at the edge, and you can see how some of the colors will start to mix. Sometimes you get it's a little bit browner when some of the colors mix together. That's okay, because I'm going to cut that off. All right, so that is that process of watercoloring. Now at this point, you could come in and dab some of the excess water away with a paper towel. You could also bring in a heat tool if you have a heat tool. So this is my heat tool, and they're very, very hot, so you have to be careful about that. But you can actually come in, now don't mind the noise, I'm gonna just turn this on, and I won't talk while I've got it going, and you can watch that it'll actually move some of the water around, or some of the color around on this paper as it's also drying it. So here we go. Okay, so I'm going to stop there because I don't need this for the card because I did prepare one in advance. But I just wanted you to see that you can use that technique. See how I've got some extra liquid over here? I'll just pick that up. And then you can also use, because this like wants to kind of curl up, you can see it's sort of curling up because of the water. You could also place like something heavy on top, whether you were comfortable it was dry enough, you could actually place this on and then place something heavy like your acrylic block on top, and that'll help it flatten out. So, and then as I mentioned, I'm now going to cut this down, so this stuff at the edge I'm not worried about because I want a smaller piece. But that's one way you can do a watercolor background. And you can also use this as a piece that you then die cut shapes out of. So, you know, if you had like a large flower image or leaves, this would be super pretty if you did some like fall colors of inks and then used it to die cut some leaves. So that's another thing you could do with this technique. So that's what I wanted to show you for that. And now I'm going to bring in, here's the piece that I had prepared ahead of time. And like I said, cut it down. And then we're going to create a pretty spring card with this background. And I'm using the Timeless Tulips photopolymer stamp set. Okay, so this is the photopolymer stamp set and the coordinating punch that goes with it. It punches out the large tulip and the leaf. So we're going to use that as well. I've got a piece of scrap basic white cardstock, and I'm bringing in the large tulip image that I've got on a block and the one leaf that we're going to use in more than one way. So again, the thing I love about Stampin' Up! Is color coordination. So we used Highland Heather on this background, as well as Pear Pizzazz, and I'm going to use both those colors for stamping the flower and leaf. So I'm going to open up this Highland Heather ink pad, and I'm going to ink this stamp. And you could do a watercolor technique with this as well by spritzing this with a little bit of water. I'm going to show you that in the next card, but we could do that here as well. But I'm just going to go ahead and stamp this one down here like so. And then I'm going to stamp a separate one, and I'm going to die cut this with this square stitched square die. But I also need another flower. Let me pull out another piece of white cardstock. Oh, here's one right here. So I need one more piece of basic white cardstock to die cut another flower, or sorry, punch out another flower. So I'm gonna do that, and then I want to show you one other thing. So this image in this stamp is one of the leaves. It matches the punch leaf on the punch that we're going to use. There's also a couple of other leaves. This also works though as another piece for this flower. So I am going to stamp it in the purple. I'm going to clean off this leaf stamp with my Stampin' chamois, and then I'm going to pick up the Pear Pizzazz ink and stamp a leaf. So I'm just going to stamp a leaf here off to the side. Actually, I'm going to stamp more than one leaf. If you have a small piece of paper that you're trying to punch, you can use a Post-it note or another piece of cardstock that you just kind of glue to the edge, and then this gives you something to hold on to while you line it up in your punch. Okay, so that's just another trick I can't see this super well from my angle, but I think I got it. And then punch that out. So there we have one of the leaves. Now I'm going to come in here. I think I'm going to have to cut this apart as well because the way the punch is, need to be able to slip it in there. So put this one in here and punch out that flower. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want to build up my image and have some more dimension. All right, so we'll do that. We'll get this purple piece, and I'm going to show you how that builds up onto the flower. All right, so I'm going to clean off some of the trash pieces from punching. And let's start to bring in the pieces that I'm going to use to make this card. So I have, again, going back to that color coordination, I just love that about Stampin' Up. So this is Highland Heather cardstock, and it's a standard 8.5 by 5.5, and I scored it at 4 4.25. I'm going to just crease that really well. And this makes a standard 4.25 by 5.5 A2 card. Now I'm going to bring in my piece of watercolor paper, and then I also cut a piece of the Pear Pizzazz cardstock, just to add, again, some more interest on this card. And I just wanted to do different. I could have just, you know, layered this, your standard layers, but I want to do something a little different, provide a little bit of interest. So this is, I think, how I'm going to build this card with like that. Now here's a piece that I had pre-done on the stitched square basic white cardstock. And then here's another of the tulip flowers that we're going to use to kind of add some dimension. And as I mentioned, this while it, you know, is a leaf, it can actually also be a part of this flower and just add a little bit more to that image. So I think that's really fun. And then we'll bring in, I actually have a total of 3 of the Pear Pizzazz leaves that I cut, and I'm just gonna, you know, I haven't decided exactly how it's all gonna go, but something like this. Just sort of build it up like that, and then in this area where I have it kind of all overlapping, I'm going to cover it up with some ribbon. So let's go ahead and put these pieces together. I'm going to start by gluing down the Pear Pizzazz cardstock. And I'm going to just place it, just try and get an equal border here and here. That looks good. Make sure my card is opening the right direction. Yes, okay, great. And now I'm going to adhere my watercolor panel. And I want the darker part up at the top. And this one I'm going to make the top and bottom border equal and equal with this. So try and get that as close as I can. That looks pretty good. Put that down. Okay, so let's build up this. I think I'm going to glue this down flat because I think I'll have enough dimension on the flower and leaves that this can be down flat. So I'm going to go ahead and put that down as well. I'm going to place this right here because I do want to put a sentiment down at the bottom. So again, just building up various layers. I like to do that with my cards so there's lots of interest. Now for this a large tulip bulb or flower, I'm going to glue the bottom down but have dimension up at the top. So I'm going to go ahead and put, I think I have a few little, actually let me just grab one of these. I'm going to, I think that should be good there. Maybe I'll just cut a couple of little side pieces from this one sheet that's almost done of my dimensionals. Just gonna put a little bit on that part of the flower and a little bit on this one. So I want to have a decent amount of dimensionals up at the top to really hold that out. And then the bottom, I'm going to also put a couple rows of the Stampin' Seal. Now pull the backings off those dimensionals. And then this is ready to go down. So see how this part's going down flat and then the top is going to sit up higher. So I just think that's kind of pretty. It adds some dimension to the flower. Looks like the front is standing up a little bit. And now let's add this extra leaf, and it can go, you know, either way. I think I like it that way with the kind of larger part down near the bottom. So I think for this I'll just add adhesive. Get that out of the way and place this right like that. So I think that's really fun, just adds a little bit more to it. And now I can build the rest of the leaves, and I think I will just put, actually, whoops, I think I'm going to use the liquid adhesive here because I'm going to just put adhesive at the bottom and let the tops kind of be a little more free. So one there. And remember too, I'm not worried about how it's kind of all coming together at the bottom because I'm going to put some ribbon on there to cover up where it all comes together. So some glue on the bottom of this one. Place that right there. Hold it for just a second so it can adhere. And then one more. I think that'll go like that. And hold it in place for a minute. Well, not a minute, a few seconds, just so it can adhere. And so that's what we have. And then I'm going to just come in with some of this. This one is Gorgeous Grape, which is a darker shade of the Highland Heather, but I think it works really well. And for this one, I want a bow because I want something big enough to cover up this area. And I typically do this right on my ribbon roll. I'll just start right here because I never know exactly how much ribbon I need to cut off to make a bow. So I usually start with it on my roll. Get my bow to the point where I'm happy with it, and then I can just cut it away from my ribbon roll. Cut the other end to be equal. And then this will pop right in here and just kind of cover up where that all comes together. I think that's really pretty. So I'm going to use a little bit of, probably a couple pieces. Let's see, I always like to have a look and see if I like one side better than the other for the front. I think I'll stick with this. And try and pick up a couple of glue dots on there. They're not real fans of sticking to ribbon, glue dots. They prefer to stick to paper. So sometimes they're a little tricky to get off of there onto the ribbon. Okay, so now I'm just going to place that, and then this gives you a chance to kind of move things around the way you want them. press that in there. So there we have that. I think that's really pretty. And the last thing I want to do, let me close up this Pear Pizzazz ink pad before I put my arm in it. I'm going to come back to my Highland Heather, and I'm going to stamp a sentiment. So I picked up this one from the set that says Happy Mother's Day, because that is coming up. So I'm just going to ink it really well. Make sure I got it all on there. And I'm going to place it a little bit to the left on here because I'm going to flag the end. Just press it down. There we go. It's very pretty. And close up that ink pad. And then I'm going to flag this end. It's a little bit longer, so I'm going to cut a little bit off first. And then just cut halfway. So just find the halfway point here, just eyeball it, and cut in. And then from each corner, cut into where that. Okay, and then you've got a nice little flag on there. And then one last thing before I put that on, and then we're also going to do something on the inside of the card. I'm going to use one of these opal rounds just to add a little something onto this sentiment. So I'm just going to pick up, let's see, use my take your pick tool. I'm just going to pick up one of these little guys right here and place it right on the end of my sentiment piece. And then I want this to be down here. It could be this low. Yeah, so I mean it could be there, or we could put it right here. So it's really up to you. I think I'll go right here, and I think I'll put it down flat. I don't think I'll pop it up. So let's see, I need it near the top. And then let's see, just like that. I want to see a little bit of that Pear Pizzazz cardstock poking out the bottom. There we go. And then the last thing to do is I want to decorate the inside of the card. So whenever I have a card that's on a colored cardstock like this, I like to put a panel on the inside. And so we're just going to stamp just a little bit on here just for fun. Back to my Highland Heather. And I've got one of the smaller tulip images from this same set. I'm going to ink that up really well. And I think I'll stamp this just down in the corner like so. Very pretty. And then add a little bit of greenery. So going back to Pear Pizzazz, and I picked up one of the smaller, thinner and straight leaves from this set, and I'm going to just do a little bit of stamping, just letting it go right off the edge of that piece, and one this way. And if you want, you could come in with the stem too if you want to add a little bit of the stem. Let's see. I'll grab this straight one. Let me switch out this leaf off of this acrylic block and add the stem. It's a little longer than this acrylic block, but I only really need a small bit at the top. So I'm just going to ink up just the top of this and place it in there, just so that flower doesn't look like it's kind of floating out there without a stem on it. So I think that looks really pretty for the inside of this card. And then I'll go ahead and put some adhesive and put it in the card. just a nice way to finish off this card, and you've got plenty of room to write your message. There we go. And so here's our final product. And I think that watercolor background just is really pretty, brings in some really nice, bringing in the colors together, and just adds a really pretty touch to that card. So I think that's really fun. I hope you enjoyed that one. And we're going to do one more watercolor card. Thank you. Okay, let's create a second card with some different watercoloring techniques. And since we have a Mother's Day card, I thought, well, let's make a card for maybe Father's Day. So this is the end product. This is what we're going to create. And we're going to start with a piece of basic white cardstock. And I believe I cut this to 2.5 by 3.5. And then because I'm using water, I'm going to use the StazOn black ink to stamp my image. And if you use StazOn, and if you're very particular about trying to keep your stamps really clean, you can also buy the StazOn cleaner. And once I stamp my image, I'll just take this cleaner and kind of go across the top and then clean it off. So that's really helpful. This is also helpful. StazOn is an ink that can be stamped on non-porous surfaces like glass and metal and plastic. And the cleaner is really helpful if, say, you're stamping on a really, I don't know, nice glass plate, and maybe you make a little mistake. This will help clean that off right away, and then you can restamp it. So that's important. And then I've talked about re-inkers before. StazOn can dry up a lot faster. Your StazOn ink pad can dry up a lot faster. So it's really helpful to have a re-inker on hand. So I really recommend getting the re-inker when you get a StazOn ink pad. So let's put those aside, and we'll just go ahead and stamp our image first. So here's the ink pad, and I'm going to take it onto my image like this, just because it's an easy one to handle. So make sure I've got lots of ink that's nice and dark, and then I'm going to stamp it down on my piece of basic white. And I'm going to press nice, even pressure on that. And I like to just give it a little extra time, just let that ink transfer over. And then look, a really nice crisp image. So that's the StazOn, and like I said, you can come in here with this StazOn cleaner. It's just a little dauber, kind of like a bingo dauber, and just go ahead and put some on there like this, and then maybe use some, let's see, I've got some paper towel right here, some paper towel, and dab it off, and then look how clean that is already. And then from this point, I'll just use my regular water and stamp cleaner. I also don't worry too much about stamps being super clean. As long as you get like the excess off, that's all I ever worry about. I don't mind if there's a little bit of discoloration. It doesn't impact the image at all. I just don't want a bunch of ink starting to build up in the recessed areas. Okay, so that's StazOn. So now we have our image, and what we're going to do is we're going to do some watercoloring. And we're going to do some of the same techniques as before. So I am going to use some ink from the ink pad. I'm using, again, Pear Pizzazz. And I'm going to just put some on the end. I don't need very much for this one. I'll make sure I get enough, though. So put a little bit of that on the end. And then the other tools we're going to use are watercolor coloring pencils, pencil crayons. So this is from one of the Stampin' Up! Watercolor pencil sets. I love these. And then we're also using the Stampin' Write markers. So not the not the Stampin' Blends. Those are alcohol-based markers. They do not work with watercoloring. But the Stampin' Right markers are water-based markers, and so they work with these watercoloring techniques. I'm also using the blender pen and, of course, a water brush pen. And we will use also a spritzer. So let's see, so we've got some green down there. So what I'm going to do with the Pacific Point marker, I'm going to take the felt tip end and I'm going to just scribble some on, again, a non-porous surface. Okay? So that should be it for that. With the brown, I'm using brown in 2 areas, and I'm going to do it with the blender pen. So I'm going to go ahead and put some brown sort of on the areas where I want it to be darkest on his hat. And then I'm going to come in with my blender pen and just go over that and start to blend some of that color out. Okay, so you can see how that works. The other way you can use that is how we're going to use the Pacific Point. You can put some on your non-porous surface. It's hard to see that crumb cake color. It's my favorite color of the browns. And then you can pick up some with your water brush and just add it on like so. Okay. So that gives us a little bit of color down in the sand. And then we're going to go ahead and, so we've got his hat done and his sand. We're going to color his shirt with the green. So I try to keep a little bit of a drier brush when I first start out with, and I'm picking up some color that I want to put on the areas that I want darker. So you can see how I'm just kind of going into these areas that I want darker on his shirt. And then once I've got that, then I can go and I can add a little bit more water, kind of dilute it a little bit more, and come in and start to move some of that color around. And then you get some nice variation in your color, and it looks a lot more watercolored. Okay, so there's that. And again, I'll just clean off my brush before I go to the next color, and that's going to be the Pacific Point. And I'm going to do the same thing. My brush is a little bit dry. I'm going to pick up a little bit of color where I want it darker. And then I can dilute it a little bit more, getting a little bit more water. So that you get some of that variation in color. And you can always go back, you can dry off your brush, go back and just pick up some heavy ink where you haven't added much water, and you can go in and touch up some areas where you want it to be darker. Okay, and then I'm going to clean off my brush. And I'm done with that part. Let's see, I think I might do the chair. In this one I did the chair darker yellow, but I think for this one I'm going to just come in with my Stampin' Right marker, just full strength, so I'm not watercoloring it at all. I'm just going to make that chair brown. Make sure I don't color his neck brown. Just get the chair. A little bit down the side. I think that looks good. And then the last thing I'm going to do is add some of the, oh, I guess I could have used the watercolor pencil too for his shorts. So I'm going to use the Daffodil Delight watercolor pencil crayon. And I'm going to just come in here and just really lightly add some, like a little bit of a kind of a halo effect around my image. So I'm just gently coloring some. The thing I love about the watercolor pencils is that it's such an easy technique. You literally can, just like I'm doing here, practically scribble it on, and then the water just totally blends it out. It makes it darker. Can you see that? And blends it out. It's just such an easy technique because the water will come in and blend all those little scribble lines. And so I'm just kind of brushing it out so that it goes from, you know, the darkest right around the image and out lighter. I do like that a lot about the watercolor pencils. So there you go, and there's there's that final image. I'm pretty happy with that. And yeah, so really what I wanted to show you here is that, you know, you don't have to have all of the tools, right? You don't have to have, you know, the pencils and the markers and the ink pad. So this is just showing you how, you know, you could purchase one set of tools and then use them in these different ways. So I think that's really a great way to utilize what you have. So now we have that piece, and I'm going to just glue this onto a piece of Pacific Point cardstock, again taking advantage of that color coordination with Stampin' Up. And I cut this Pacific Point cardstock a 1/2 inch larger. Normally my borders are 1/8 of an inch, but I wanted this one to be a little bit larger, so I went 1/2 inch larger. So the basic white was 2.5 by 3.5, and this is 3 by 4. Okay, so just glue that down. And then I have some of this thicker twine, which I think is looks very masculine. I like that. And I'm going to just wrap this around twice. So I want my knot to be over here to the side, so I'm going to just wrap it around twice. So I like to get a little extra, and then just give myself enough to tie a knot. And that's where I'm going to cut that off. And go ahead and put this on. And if you struggle with working with this, you can put some adhesive in the back to keep it in place. And then I'm going to just tie a knot here to the side. And then if you didn't get this tight enough, here's another trick for you. You can put some adhesive in the back. So a strip of adhesive, and then what you do is you just pull your pieces tight into that. So see how that is gonna, right, pick up any of the slack. So again, this piece. So see how it's extra is there, and now it's nice and tight across the front. So that's just another little trick. I think I cut a little bit extra of that off. And you could even fray the ends here by just sort of untwisting some of it. That's kind of a good look too, especially for something that's like beachy. All right, so there's that piece. And then we're going to stamp a word image. And I wanted to show you this as well, what you can do here. So again, if maybe you only have the watercolor markers and you don't have ink pads, you can still use them on your stamps. So I take the felt tip end and just sort of on the edge, and I just color my image. And now it wants to dry pretty quick on here, but because they're water-based, you can huff on it and stamp it down. And there you go, it's perfect. Another thing you can do is color this again. So get your get ink on there. And then you can make this look a little more watercolor by taking your spritzer and just spritzing some water. I'm going to do this off to the side, but I'm basically just going to hold it like this and spritz some water and let the water drop onto there. I spritzed it a little more than once because I didn't do a good job of getting it all on there. And then stamp that down, and then you get a little bit more of a watercolor look to that image. So if you can see that. So that's another technique you can use. And then I don't have my circle punches with me here, so I am going to punch that with a circle punch to go on this card, but I'll have to do that afterwards. So I've got my card base, and this is my standard. This is sort of my go-to size, 8.5 by 5.5, and then I fold it in half. I scored this one ahead of time. Use my bone folder. And then I have a piece of designer series paper that I cut. I think it's, let me just check. I think it's 2.5. Yes, 2.5 inches by 5.5 inches. So it's going to go the full length of the card. And I'm just going to place that off to the side like that. This is designer series paper, and I love that Stampin' Up's designer series paper. I think all of it is double-sided. So I like that. There is some text on here, so I think I've got it right side up. So I'm just going to place that off to the side. I'll make sure it's lined up perfectly at the top, and if there's a little extra hanging off because maybe my card isn't exactly 5.5 or my designer series paper isn't cut exactly right, then I'll just trim this off from the inside, a tiny bit. So there's my card, and then I'm going to take this one, because we've got lots of bulk on the back, I'm going to use pop dots on there, or dimensionals. Some people call them pop dots, pop-up dots. I'm going to add those to the back. Maybe one more in the middle for good measure. And then take all those backings off. Sometimes I do well using this tool, sometimes I don't. There we go. But if you struggle with, using your fingers to get something like that off, that tool is handy. Then I'm going to just place this right there. And then I will punch this and also use another piece of the Pacific Point to put that up in the top corner. And so that will be our final project. So I hope you enjoyed learning some different ways to use water-based products like our ink pads, our watercolor pencil crayons, our watercolor markers. We used the blender pen, we used a water brush, we used a spritzer. So I hope you enjoyed that and learned a little bit, and I hope you liked the cards. Thank you for joining me. Bye.